Yo, hey, I just rewatched one of my videos I posted, and I was talking about how the guy noticed that I was just immediately going to work, and then he's like, you know, I did. My response to that was, "Well, we're here to work, ain't we?" You know what I mean? And I left out the part that I made extra money because the boss was happy about that. Okay, and I did point out the fact that my entire life, I call it stumbling into righteousness, right? So I'll find some good thing to whatever degree, and then I read the Bible much later in life. Like, I wasn't really a Bible study guy in the beginning. I kind of figured some stuff out, and some stuff was like, I really made mistakes. And I mean, like, more mistakes than right, for sure, for the record. And then, as I'm stumbling into righteousness, I guess because God's so good, He knew that I had to figure it out for myself. Because I'm skeptical, like, I don't trust nobody, right? So I guess God knew that I had to figure it out for myself. And then the principles of the Bible be revealed in me later on, so that it would actually sink in. You know, let that sink in type of deal was a necessity to be able to walk in my calling. But for me to bring it in, to be able to have it, to distribute, I had to find it first and then read about it and be like, oh, that's why that's working. Like, when I'm reading these things and it says it works, I'm recognizing, yeah, that works. I've seen how, you know, if I show up early for work and then, like, I do a good job, my career advances, you know, just for real simplistic. And then I read in the Bible, do all your work as if you're doing it for the Lord Himself. I was like, oh yeah, well, if I was roofing Jesus' house, I probably would, you know, take a little extra time in the details to make sure it's the utmost quality. You know what I mean? And then, of course, the boss is going to notice that he's never, you know, telling me to do stuff or fixing mistakes or having to come back years later, whatever. And then with years of reputation in the industry, you know, that brings about a certain pay scale that's more prosperous, right? So when I read in there, it's like, do all your work as if you're doing it for the Lord Himself. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But had I read it first and then tried it, that probably would have saved me a lot of trouble. But the way I'm geared with so much skepticism, because the world's such an evil place, I don't know that I would have read it and then just believed it. I don't know that I could take God at His word if I hadn't come about my knowledge of certain things the way that I did. And then the trauma of life, you know what I mean? The leading up to the come to Jesus moments, we've all had them. We've all had them. There's some kind of very significant, trauma's the right word. I mean, yeah, there's some kind of tragedy, heartbreak, whatever, and at different stages of life, that looks different. You know what I mean? So, like, you know, you got puppy love and all kind of stuff, and then, you know, she gives a Valentine to the other kid or whatever. You know what I mean? But up to that point, at that stage in your life, like, that's the worst thing that ever happened. You know what I mean? So that's devastating. I did later in life, you know, you might be, you know, in theater and, you know, Larry blows up and you gotta, like, wipe Larry off your forehead and keep, you know, stay engaged in the firefight. Significant difference in the two scenarios, but different age and stage of life, you know what I mean? And difficulties, okay? So we're molded by the way the world, our perception of the world. Now, you might be right beside me and get a different view of this thing because you were built different by God for your purpose. And we might just be kicking it for a season. And then you're off to yonder and I'm over here. Whatever. You know what I'm saying? And that could be, that is why it says some plant a seed, some fertilize, and some harvest, and all sort of kind of stuff. And the cliche in that is, it takes a village to raise a child type of deal. But it's the community, and we're children of God. So as we're elevated into dominion over the earth, to be able to handle that properly, we need to experience some things here on this earth, and then on the next earth there won't be much of this stuff because we'll all be walking in obedience. So when they ask you, when you're out here in the world, they say, well, why do babies die or murder or whatever tragedy? God allowed free will so that love could exist. And then because people choose badly and behave badly, it puts us under certain pressure. Now, some of us will take that and learn to do things God's way. And others not. They'll just rebel from the lessons. And a root of bitterness sets in. You know what I mean? And even that can be overcome with the root of love. Can choke out the bitterness. Which is a lot about what I just talked about. But on the new earth, there is no guile, schism, ought not. There's none of that. There's none of that. Because anybody that would allow that or took pleasure in that is not there. Okay? So why do people go to hell? Because they're not qualified to be on the new earth. So we're here in this proving ground, and that's what we need to be focused on. We don't want God's kids to go to hell. And God's kid might be, Uncle Ralph or Jabal or Tracy or whoever. You know what I mean? You never know. You never know. And when we read in the Bible, you'll see Jesus talking to Peter. At one point, he's like, the Holy Ghost has revealed this to you. And at another point, he's like, get thee behind me, Satan. But he's talking to Peter both times. You know what I mean? And he refers to some people, he says, you're of your father, the devil. You know what I'm saying? So, when you see, you judge the tree by the fruit. So in one place, you see some ought not. That comes from the devil. And then on the other hand, you see some goodness, and that comes from the light. And a rebuke to try to keep somebody's... you got to rebuke the evil in somebody, right? And when you're doing that, it might feel bad. You need to do that in the mirror, by the way. One of my favorites is to look in the mirror, point out my obvious sin to myself, tell it to leave, and be like, get your shit together, Skip. You know what I mean? And I need to have tough love with myself. When I'm standing there and I'm looking at the pork chop, I'm on the road. I go to the place. It's breakfast time. I'm freaking hungry. You know what I mean? And I look around and everything's pork. And it says don't eat pork. So I'm just like, there's something about the tablecloth. I don't know. Nobody ever went to hell because they did not eat pork. So I'm going to go with don't eat pork, right? That's just my own personal choice. I feel like I'm respecting him. And in the moment that I'm suffering with no breakfast, I guess we're not eating today because all I got's pizza and it's got pork all over it. So, oh well. Go on about my business. That's a form of worship. So because I put God's standards as the most high in my life, So I love God more than I want to eat breakfast in that moment. And then that's a form of worship. The root word of worship, worthship. You know what I mean? I don't want to be found worthless. Because if you say that real fast, it's worthless. So I don't want to be worthless. So I want to prove my worthship in this test of, is God higher than breakfast? Right? So when I align it this way and I think about it in a manner like, do I love God more than biscuits and gravy with freaking sausage gravy? Right? Well, obviously I love God more than, pepperoni. Okay? So, yeah, when you look at it like that, it comes with an ease. There's an ease. It's light. It's easy. That yoke, that burden of no breakfast now is like, I'm going like, I'm waiting. It's like, I got 2 hours before I can stop driving this thing to make my appointment on time, blah, blah, whatever. And to be able to do that, I can't stop this truck. You know what I mean? So to be a good employee, because I'm going to haul this load as if I'm taking, critical material for Jesus to build the kingdom. Right? Because I'm doing everything for God. So to do this, I got to take a 30-minute break in 8 hours. Okay? But then I had to do a 10-hour break to get enough time to be to the delivery. So I'm skipping the 30-minute break by stopping the vehicle for the day. Because if I do a 30-minute break, drive some more, finish out the day, and then start again in the morning, I'm closer when I start, but it's potato. But that 30 minutes in all reality, if I don't do the 30-minute break, I'm 30 minutes quicker to the destination. See what I'm saying? Because I got to do a 10-hour break. I don't have the time it takes to drive all the way to the destination. I'm like an hour short. So I'll have to do a 10-hour break to get the time to be able to deliver. So if I drive for 8 hours without stopping, that puts me 30 minutes further or closer to the destination, which gives me 11 minutes. Got 15-minute post-trip, 15-minute pre-trip after the 10-hour break. So that's 10 hours and 30 minutes. I'm not taking the 30-minute break over here. And so when you add all that together for the destination for 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, I will be there at, like 7:47. So, like, am I cutting it close? I mean, yeah. Are we talking about, 1,348 miles in 2 days? That's exactly what we're talking about. And by taking it to that level, do you think my boss doesn't notice that? Do you think when I say, hey, boss, this is BS one way or another, like you got to do this to fix that, and I consistently do this and perform at this level for 5 years, something goes squirrely for whatever reason, and I'm like, hey, it's like this, it's like that, and like this, and he's like, cool, you know what I mean? Do what you do. Hey, I need reimbursed on this thing because I couldn't get a hold of nobody, and I paid this money to get the situation, I paid for this airbag that blowed up to get to yonder. I paid the mechanic because I can't get a hold of nobody or whatever like that. Yeah, the reimbursement comes right on in there. I just take a picture of the receipts and send it. I don't even fill out the trip sheets right around here. You know what I mean? It's like I'm not the accountant. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'll fill out the front of it that says where I'm coming and going and blah blah. Take a picture of the bill. Honestly, I worked here for a year before I realized there was a back side of the thing. Because like the little envelopes I always filled out was on the front. And it's got like a breakdown, an itemized list on the back. I worked here for like a year before I even seen that. Like one day I just have to lay it down face first. And I was like, oh, there's all this stuff on the back. I was like, well, they seem to be figuring it out. So I'm just like, they'll figure it out. Anyway, yeah, so I was walking in the world just try to have food, man. You know what I mean? I'm way out there at the end of the last dirt road, and it's just like, I told my dad, I said, Dad, I need some shoes. These sandals ain't gonna cut it, man. It was cold last year. And it's the same sandals from last year. And he looked at me, he said, you don't need shoes, you need a job. And he just got in the truck and drove off. And it's like, you know, Jude. So I'm thinking to myself, because he would leave it for like 3 months at a time. And so it's like I had a dad, but kind of like, you know, raised without a dad, but kind of had a dad. You know what I mean? It's I understand like the single mom stuff and how like these kids wind up girly and all that kind of stuff like that. But my mom was freaking brutal, like a savage. You know what I mean? Like she would kick your ass, like for real. If she told you that she was going to chop you, well, anyway, she didn't play. Anyway, so I seen these things, and I done these things or whatever, and I wasn't grown up churching. And then later reading the Bible, I would read it and recognize it. So I refer to that process as stumbling into righteousness. So by the time I find something in the Bible, I'm like, okay, wow, here's the standard operating procedure in place from the creator of the universe. And if you abide by this, you will be more prosperous. And once you realize that, you go all the way back to like, if they don't do this, specifically the way I say, throw rocks at them until they're dead. You know, you read that the first time, you're like, what? This is what? But then after you've been involved with it for a while, and then, you know, you've already been living your life and you're a grown-ass man, and you realize right and wrong, and then you read the principles and stuff, then you realize, oh, wow, this is the creator, and you entertain the notion because you're in the midst of a come-to-Jesus moment of trauma and turmoil in your life, and you're like, God, I can't do this, help. And he shows up, you're like, oh, wow. And it's like the beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. So it's like fear, like, wow, God actually is real. Fear, God actually is here. Fear, God can throw me in the lake of fire. I want to avoid that. You know, which you got the sheep, you got the goats. Which line do you want to be in? I want to be in the line with the sheep, for real. Align me with El Sheepo, please. So I just want to be obedient, man, and I don't want to be dissing God. I don't want to be less than what He created me to be. You know what I'm saying? And then there's like this whole other glorious thing where it's just like, what if I actually lived to my full potential? Like, I was drinking beer daily, smoking weed non-stop. Like, you know, a freaking 20 sack a day was no big deal at all. And where I come, well, I was smoking a lot of weed. And I excelled in all these different areas, you know what I mean? And I was under all this trauma that I hadn't dealt with, which is probably why I was smoking weed. And then, pro tip, when you get off of drugs and alcohol and you see your problems, you're like, oh, wow. That's why I was drinking and smoking. When you have that moment, go ahead and, like, go talk to a preacher. Like, for real, in that moment specifically, that you've sobered up, and you see your problem, and you say to yourself, okay, this is why I was drinking. I thought my life sucked because I was drinking. No, actually, I was having fun while I was drinking. But the part that sucked is this right here. And I was drinking to forget about this. Now I'm sober, here's this. Preacher man, can you help me with this right here? There's something over here pestering me. Need a little help. So go ahead, yeah. Well, there's 20 minutes of the 5-minute ministry. All right, Raquel, go get them.